Honor for me to be the 29th Srinivasan oration presenter. I have had a wonderful visit to Chennai, and I very much appreciated the hospitality that has been extended to me. I have been told that a previous orator fainted during the presentation. I hope not to do that, and I successfully didn't fall, so maybe we're off to a good start here. I would like to thank Dr. E.S. Krishnamurthy, the T.S. Srinivasan Chair of Clinical Neurosciences, who made the invitation and allowed me to come to present. Mr. Srinivasan, in his remarks, very appropriately mentioned that there are two areas that we must always approach when we're talking about elderly people and their illnesses. One, on the psychosocial side, the care for them, and two, on the research side, trying to understand the causes and develop therapies. Krish is very much an expert on the psychosocial side and has devoted much of his research effort to building up those programs. And of course, his father, Dr. Srinivas, has been a delight to get to meet and interact with since I have been here. And I've already learned a great deal of neurological history, and it's been just wonderful. And some of you know that he has devoted his life to the mission of caring for people, including people who cannot afford medical care. And he is really a person who lives up to the statement attributed to Mahatma Gandhi that we can double our joys by endeavoring to have the sorrows of others. So it's been a great privilege for me to meet him. And then finally, the T.S. Srinivasan Charitable Trust, the Center for Clinical Neurosciences that they support, and the family. It's just been a real honor to be able to interact with them. Well, at Washington University in St. Louis, we have an Alzheimer's disease research center. As I said, there are these two major areas we must discuss when we're talking about the elderly, the psychosocial care and the research. And I'm going to focus my remarks primarily on the research side. And this is the team of individuals whom I have the privilege to direct at our research center in Washington University. And I list them here only because the research work that I will present has been done largely by them. When we're talking about aging, we often focus on the illnesses of aging. It's important to recognize that there are many aging individuals who do very well. They live long and productive and happy lives. I show this photograph of one of our volunteers in our research program on the occasion of her 100th birthday. And you can, I think, easily tell that she is one of the individuals who has escaped many of the illnesses, including dementia. She is mentally alert, and she's vibrant and active and integrated into life. So this is what we all should aspire to live a long life and keep all of our mental abilities intact. It is possible to do that, but how we can guarantee that for all of us is the question. So on the other side of healthy aging is aging in which mental faculties are eroded, and we call this dementia. Dementia has a definition. This is the definition, that areas of reasoning or memory, at least two of those areas, are impaired, and they're impaired so the individual no longer can carry out his or her daily life to the level that they once were able to do it. They have declined in their ability to carry out daily function because of this loss of mental ability. And it's important always to understand that we all have different abilities. We're born with different strengths, and we're trained or educated in different areas. So it's important to understand how a person has declined in relation to what he or she once was doing, not in comparison to how other people are doing. So the principle of intra-individual decline. Now, in developing countries, I am aware that there are problems in initiating research programs in dementia, particularly in Asian countries. There is a great respect for elders, and it may be difficult for family members to report that their parent is declining in terms of their ability to do their daily functioning, because in that way they may stigmatize them as having an illness, or they may believe that that decline is part of the aging process. It is not. Normal aging does not have this decline of the ability to perform your daily activities. So that's a barrier. How can we report older person's decline if if the family does not wish to do that, or they think it's just part of the aging process? Second, in developing countries, of course, there are many other needy illnesses, including communicable or infectious diseases, and so the emphasis and the funding may go or focus on those rather than these chronic illnesses. There may be other barriers to having individuals participate in research, including differences between traditional medical beliefs versus Western beliefs. Illiteracy is a major problem, and poverty, because it may be difficult for people to get care, much less to participate in research. And finally, at this point, we do not have truly effective therapies, so there's little incentive for people to participate in research. But I think there is great value in conducting research in India and in other countries. I show here a report from a study done in a rural community in India about how many people in each age group, shown here from 65 to 74, from 75 to 84, and from 85 and beyond, develop dementia each year. It's a funny term called incidence and rates per 1,000 person years, but you can see in comparison with this rural area of India, a comparison group of a rural area in the United States, and at every age level, the frequency, the development of Alzheimer's disease is much higher, about between 2 and 6 times higher in the United States. So a lower frequency of dementia in India. So the question would be, why? Why does it differ? So you have heard already that there is a growing imperative to study aging in developing countries, primarily because of the numbers. Much of the world's aging population already is in developing countries, at least 60%. And of course that's going to grow. The Indian subcontinent alone now has 1/6 of the world's population overall, and will have 15% of the world's population age 60 and over in just 11 years. And studying the frequency of dementia in different populations, I think, is very important, because it may help us understand what may protect one group of individuals or put another group of individuals at risk, and this will give us information about the causes of this illness. So the presence of dementia in at least one segment of the Indian population is the lowest recorded. And why should that be? Does it have to do with dietary factors, with other health practices, with genetic inheritance? Unless we study this, we won't know, we won't understand, so we need to double our efforts in research. And this graph shows that over the next several years, the frequency of dementia worldwide is going to increase almost exponentially. A huge number of older people are going to develop dementia. And you notice the most developed countries doesn't change nearly so much. This worldwide explosion of dementia is going to will be related to the fact of the less developed countries. It's going to really increase. So it's a coming epidemic in the less developed countries, including India. That's going to drive the dementia occurrence. In the United States, I think it already is an epidemic. It has a terrible impact upon the individual because they lose their capacity to be their normal human self. They lose their power of reasoning, they lose their memory, they lose their ability to care for themselves, and it takes a terrific toll on the family who has to care for the individual. It's very expensive to provide this care. So we need to address this as a serious illness. Once again, not part of normal aging. This is an illness. It shortens life, and it causes a tremendous toll on both the individual and the family. I thought I might show you one person's anguish in developing Alzheimer's disease. It happens to be a visual artist, a painter, a man named William Utermohlen, who lived from 1993 to 2007. Although he was born in the United States, he did almost all of his artistic work in London. He was diagnosed there with Alzheimer's disease in 1995 at a relatively early age, at age 62. Now, his work has been reviewed and collected by an American pharmaceutical firm called Myriad Pharmaceuticals, and they should have credit for what I'm about to show you. So as a young man, here was a pencil self-portrait done by Utermohlen. You'd notice that he has sort of a characteristic that we'll see in some later self-portraits where he displays his face sort of asymmetrically, and he makes, for whatever reason, he makes his right ear become very prominent. So he went off to London and had a very productive artistic life and married an art historian. But in 1995 is when he was given the diagnosis of dementia. And I think this next portrait is a self-portrait. And I think it looks very stark to me. So he shows himself in an empty studio, and perhaps this was his last major painting. And here it is. It's called Blue Skies. And you see him sitting at a desk, or a table, almost as if he's holding on. And he looks very distraught and very disappointed and very afraid. And it's almost as if through the open window he sees his future as the emptiness of this blue sky above him. And then he did no further large paintings, but he did do several self-portraits. Here's one when he was about 2 years into his illness. It's a self-portrait that you may be able to make out. Here is a saw. He was just told that day that the only way to confirm the diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease is by autopsy. So I think the inclusion of the saw is somewhat and we see sort of an anguish on his face about what is in store for him. Then a little bit later, another self-portrait, and here he looks, to me, looks sad and resigned about his fate. Once again, there's that sort of that asymmetry of his face, and there's that prominent right ear. And then here is his final painting in the last stages of his illness. He no longer could write his name at this point. He tried to give the eyes. I think we see the outline of that right ear, but he ended up trying to erase it, so he was unable to complete this. So I think we've seen here sort of a psychological scrutiny of an intense personal experience of progressing through the stages of dementia. And we get something of the emotional devastation that people go through as they have this illness. Well, this again shows that Alzheimer's disease, as we've already heard, is very much age-related. The older we are, the more likely we are to develop Alzheimer's disease. These are information, data from the United States. It says that there's very few people who have Alzheimer's disease below the age of 65, but once it reaches 65, it increases dramatically. Matter of fact, in this particular depiction, for every 5 years of age after age 65, the frequency of developing Alzheimer's disease doubles. So if we say something like 5% of the people at age 65 have Alzheimer's disease, at age 70 it's 10%, at age 75 it's 20%, and so forth until age 85, 50% of people age 85 have Alzheimer's disease. Tremendous number association with age. The older we are, the more likely we are to develop this illness. There are also genetic factors, and these vary widely among individuals and among populations. Once again, to understand them, we need to include many populations to understand how each one might provide both risk for developing the disease, because Alzheimer's disease does run in families, but also potential protective factors. Perhaps we can inherit a genetic profile from our family that enables us to live without developing it. Well, we can't do much about age. We can't do much about the genetic profile that our parents have given us, but there are other risk factors for developing dementia that perhaps we can do something about, can modify. And one of the most important is the vascular risk factors, particularly heart health. So things that even in middle age that occur to us from our heart health that may influence whether we develop dementia and Alzheimer's disease decades later. Another potentially modifiable risk factor are these psychosocial factors or lifestyle factors, how we maintain our lives and whether that helps us ward off the potential onset of dementia. Under vascular factors are things you know well, high blood pressure, hypertension, obesity, diabetes, high cholesterol, high lipids, having heart disease, and having strokes. All of these have been associated in late life with a greater risk of having Alzheimer's disease. All of these are potentially preventable. We can control blood pressure. We control cholesterol. We can do something about this. So if this really is a factor, then this is one area that we might explore to try to reduce the risk of Alzheimer's. And dietary factors, I think, aren't examined quite enough. Unfortunately, in the United States, the things that taste really good are the things that are bad for us. But what we have found that there are certain diets that seem to be associated with a reduced risk of developing Alzheimer's, including fish and fruits and vegetables, light to moderate alcohol consumption, and antioxidants. And there's great interest in example for curcumin as a potential treatment for Alzheimer's. By the way, resveratrol is an ingredient found in red wine, and may be the reason why red wine seems to have some protective factor. And here are the psychosocial factors. Basically what these indicate is remaining thoroughly engaged, so physically active, mentally engaged, and socially connected. All of these have been associated with reduced risk of developing dementia. Now, we've heard a little bit about the clinical dementia rating. I certainly don't want to belabor that. We call it, for short, the CDR. But again, the emphasis on the CDR is simply to assess this principle of whether the person has declined in his or her mental ability so that they can carry out their usual functions. If they cannot, then the CDR is able to capture that at an early stage and help us determine whether someone is demented, and if so, to what severity. And this is just a sort of a grid that shows the clinical dementia rating. And again, I don't want to belabor this, but I'll be happy to address any questions should there be any. We have some treatments now approved in the United States for people who have dementia that is caused by Alzheimer's disease. And in late life, I think by far the leading cause of dementia, this loss of memory and thinking ability, is Alzheimer's disease. It's not the only cause, but in late life it is by far the leading cause. And these are the current drugs that are available to treat mild to moderate Alzheimer's disease. I think they work, I think they help, but they help only to a very small degree. They are by no means are as effective as we would like, and by no means do they recommend cures. So we use them because that's all we have available, but we certainly need more powerful and more effective therapies. So how are we going to do that? I think we have to return to the idea of what are the causes of Alzheimer's disease. So here I've shown an old image from Professor Alzheimer of his original patient, a woman who developed dementia at age 51 and died at age 55. Professor Alzheimer retrieved her brain, did an autopsy, and under the microscope found what we now call senile plaques, shown here, and neurofibrillary tangles. We see a more modern depiction of the plaques and tangles here, but the plaques and tangles are simply hallmarks that the brain cells are dying. That's the bottom line in Alzheimer's disease. Brain cells die, they're lost. And so not surprisingly, the brain of an Alzheimer patient is much smaller, it's shrunken in comparison with a healthy person of the same age. You can see that the amount of brain tissue is much less, the fluid spaces are much wider. The brain is smaller because brain cells are lost. So why are they lost? Well, maybe we can come back to these hallmark lesions and try to understand them, and we've done a great deal of work in this area in the past 2 decades. Professor Sisodia and his team have contributed greatly to the understanding of this. We know now that the plaques are made up of an abnormal processed protein called amyloid, and the tangles include a protein called tau. So we can understand these proteins, and we can begin to think of how abnormalities of amyloid, here this is the symbol for amyloid, and here is tau, what the cascade is, what goes wrong first, and does that lead to the ultimate cause, which is cell death, cell loss. Is it this type of a model? Are they both working simultaneously? And we can begin to try to devise therapies to address both of those models. And we have many compounds now, in 2009, that are in the clinic being tested. Some address amyloid, some address tau, some try to restore the brain cell health, including potentially stem cell therapies, and many more possible therapies. But they must be tested. We must, if we want to really develop truly effective therapies, we must commit ourselves to testing and evaluating these drugs to find out which provide benefit and which may be safe. We need drugs that are effective, but also that are safe as well. And some of you may have been here when Professor Jeffrey Cummings from UCLA was the T.S. Srinivasan oration presenter, and I point that out as well. Now, I just want to spend the final few moments of my remarks on a potential hypothesis about the origins of Alzheimer's disease. And this has both a very profound and potentially negative side, but also ultimately, I hope, a potentially very positive side. So What this diagram shows, and this is hypothesis, is this white line marks the onset of the symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. That is the onset of dementia, which is how we diagnose Alzheimer's disease, when dementia occurs. And what this says is when we make the diagnosis, it may be too late. Work from our group at Washington University and others has shown that at this very stage, just when we physicians, neurologists, and old age psychiatrists and geriatricians make the diagnosis, we know that already in certain areas of the brain that are particularly vulnerable to the Alzheimer process, already up to 60% of the brain cells have been lost. So if we introduce treatment here, which is, of course, the only time we start therapy is when we make the diagnosis, it's too late. The brain is already badly damaged. So what we think may happen is that the plaques and the neurofibrillary tangles may begin many years before they build up and cause enough brain damage that the brain fails and the symptoms appear. What we would like to do is, if this is true, is to try to devise treatments that we'd introduce here before there is substantial brain cell loss. Well, we can't do that now because we can't diagnose it in this pre-symptomatic stage. So what we think we're going to need to do is to develop some tests for this stage. We call them biomarkers. And we call them biomarkers before the dementia occurs, so antecedent biomarkers. I really don't have time to go over this in detail. I will tell you that I think the future research in Alzheimer's disease is going to be in two major areas. One is biomarker development. Can we develop a test for the illness? And in drug therapies that attack the very processes of the disease in terms of the amyloid and the tau. There are many potential biomarkers. I call this preclinical Alzheimer's disease. That is, the Alzheimer process is in the brain, but there's no clinical detection. There's no symptoms yet, no dementia. So preclinical Alzheimer's. And there are many ways we can try to think about trying to look at changes that tell us that the brain process has already started, including assays of blood and spinal fluid. And I'm only going to mention here imaging strategies. A technique where they can inject a tracer that goes through the vein, gets into the brain, and if there is amyloid plaque deposited there, remember that's a hallmark of Alzheimer's disease, this tracer will bind to that amyloid plaque, and then a PET scan, a special type of scan, will be able to detect the retention of this tracer because of amyloid plaques. This would be a PET scan of someone who has lots of amyloid in their brain. So if this holds up, and other biomarkers like it, we may be on the verge of having a test to show us Alzheimer's disease in a living patient before they have to come to autopsy when we look at the brain under the microscope. Now I show this, we've been studying lots of people at Washington University who are very healthy from age 45 to age 88 with this amyloid tracer called PIB. And this just shows the amount of amyloid tracer retention, binding there is in the brain. You can notice that almost everybody has little or no amyloid tracer retention. That doesn't have amyloid in the brain, even our oldest person. But some people, beginning around 55, have an increasing amount of retention. Here's the actual percentages of this. So a few people from age 50 to 59 have amyloid in the brain, about 6%. A few more, about 18% from 60 to 69, from 70 to 79. Now it gets to be a little more substantial, 26%, and 30% of our series in this case of 80 to 89-year-olds. Now remember, all these people are perfectly healthy. They don't have any symptoms of dementia. But the question is, if they're carrying this amyloid in the brain and they continue to live, does this mean that they're destined to become demented? If so, this might be a stage where we can intervene and try to prevent the dementia from occurring if we develop those effective therapies. And I'll just show you one last imaging sign of a group headed by Brad Dickerson at Massachusetts General Hospital has shown that in those people who have the amyloid in the brain, even if they're healthy, they're already beginning to experience brain changes. They're losing, shown in the red and yellow areas, they're losing the thickness of the brain in these areas, and then once they develop dementia and progress in dementia severity, it gets more pronounced. So I think this group of individuals are non-demented individuals, no dementia, but already having the amyloid plaques in the brain as depicted by this PET scan indicate they're beginning to lose brain structure. So this is not a benign process. So what I hope is that in 2020, at the, let's see if my calculations are right, the 40th T.S. Srinivasan lecture, that you'll have someone here who can say that we have developed a way to detect Alzheimer's changes in the brain, regardless of whether the person is demented or not, and that we will have now some therapies to be able to treat them. So what I hope I've been able to share with you today is that all countries are experiencing an aging population, and Alzheimer's disease, as a very clearly age-related illness, will soon reach epidemic proportions, not just in the United States, but worldwide, everywhere, India included. We need improved detection, and I think detection at a stage before there is substantial brain damage. I think we're very close to being able to say that we can do that. And finally, if we can detect the illness at a very early stage, we need to do something about it. We need to have drugs that interfere with the abnormal process and arrest the ongoing brain cell destruction. If that's the case, then I ultimately hope that not only will we be trying to cure people who have the Alzheimer dementia, I think our greatest chance of success will be trying to prevent people from becoming demented. Thank you very much for your attention.